Welcome along to NUFC Matters with me, Steve Wraith, and Liam Kennedy from the Shields Gazette. As always, is a Tuesday. Apologies for the pre-record, and unfortunately, it means you can't interact with this show this week. I've got 2 days away, and I've had to pre-record Monday and Tuesday shows. So this might be slightly out of date. We've not really done this with Liam before, but we're trying to keep it as up to date as possible. So we're going to talk about Newcastle's forthcoming season in the Premier League. We're also going to talk about the squad and look in depth at the squad that we've got available. And obviously, that will, change day to day as we record this on Sunday. We're currently looking at signing, Ryan Fraser and Callum Wilson, both from Bournemouth. Jamal Lewis, of course, from Watford. There's other players potentially in the mix. Holden from Arsenal. So, we may have the unfortunate situation where those players have signed and we're talking about them as potential players when in fact they've become players. So let's hope that's happened. But Liam, great to have you on the show again, mate. And let's look at the goalkeeping position first and foremost, mate. For the forthcoming season. It's obviously something we've discussed a little bit on the show. Woodman gone out on a season-long loan. Dubravka unfortunately injured. Darlow had to step into the breach as he has done in Carling Cup games, etc., over the last few years. But you would imagine it's a straight battle between him and Gillespie this season.
Yeah, it looks that way, doesn't it? I think it's interesting because if the Woodman deal hadn't been done so early in the summer, you might have quite fancied him having a little run just to see what he was like, given he played a full season in the Championship last year. He's an impressive goalkeeper, England Youth International formerly, but obviously he's away at the moment, so it purely is down to Carl Darlow and Mark Gillespie, given that really bad injury, such a big blow to Newcastle United's early season chances anyway, because Martin Dubravka, as we've both said on this show, was Newcastle United's player of the season last year. Had he not have put in the performances that he did, the amount of saves that he made, crucial saves as well at crucial times, he won Newcastle United more points than he lost. Yes, he made the odd mistake. He's not perfect. But when you're having to make so many saves, you're under so much pressure because of the lack of protection in front of you. You're obviously going to make mistakes. But I think Dubravka's a fantastic goalkeeper. And the problem that you've got is with him being out medium term, you haven't got anybody who can step in and cover him to anywhere near the standard. Carl Darlow's a decent goalkeeper. Now, I know I've seen the footage from the games. He's been terrible. He looked awful in that game against Middlesbrough, the Hammering. But I still think he's all right. I think he's an all right goalkeeper, and he's a good number two. But unfortunately, sometimes you need your number twos to come in and do this medium term. And I think a lot of people haven't got a lot of confidence in Carl Darlow, which is why I think people are looking towards Mark Gillespie, despite the fact he's a little bit unknown. I've got good contacts up in Scotland, and a lot of people speak really highly of him. City did a really good job up there. Was one of the top-rated goalkeepers in the division, apart from the obvious couple at the top, from your likes of Rangers, Alan McGregor, Celtic, Scott Bain, and other goalkeepers as well. I think it's a tough choice. It's one that Bruce is going to have had a good look at in pre-season. And if he's looked at this and thought and seen the goals they've conceded, then Darlow isn't really going to get an opportunity. But I think when he brought Darlow in for the FA Cup games last season, I think he quite impressed Bruce. So I would suspect Darlow's going to get a chance. But it's gone from probably the strongest position in Newcastle United's squad because of Darlow, Dubravka, to potentially one of the weakest, and that's only taken one injury to do so, but that can happen in the goalkeeping position. It's really down to Darlow to sort of bring back some of that form that he did show, and he was a decent goalkeeper for Newcastle during the Championship season, but he had the odd rick in him, and we need to see him channel that sort of positive. I think he's quite a positive goalkeeper. A bit of a talker. He makes really good saves. He's excellent at saving penalties. He has got positives, but ultimately he's not Martin Dubravka, and that's one of the biggest problems that they're going to face.
Yeah. So I mean, come to next week, have a think about it as we progress through the squad, and I want your prediction as to who is going to make that starting lineup against West Ham. Let's look at the back four. Obviously, the back four was relatively successful last year at both ends of the pitch. There was obviously enough clean sheets to keep Newcastle United out of trouble. A lot of that was down to Dubravka, but we had a lot of goals from that area as well. Are we expecting to see the same? Are you expecting a similar kind of setup? Because obviously when Bruce came in, he altered the style of play, altered Rafa's solid unit at the back, but then quickly reverted back to it once the results started to go against him, and almost played a Rafa style of football last year, which ultimately ground out the results.
Yeah, and then I think they struggled with that towards the end. It was a year of transition for Bruce. I think towards the end of the season, he almost he trusted in his own methods. I think he really did that during the middle of that season when results didn't come their way, and that wasn't a positive thing to see from a manager. But it was also quite. I suppose you could say he just managed it reasonably well in some ways. He just worked with what he had. There is sort of positives in that as well, but I think from a back four sense, I've talked about this on the show before. I'll start on the right, move across to the left. I'm not convinced in any way, shape, or form this squad has got a right back worthy of playing in a back four at all in it. I don't think Emil Kraft. I've seen Emil Kraft play centre half in a three on the right. We've seen him play on the left. We've seen him play as a right wing back, and I just don't genuinely believe he's a defender of any real quality. I'd love to think I was proved wrong, but I don't rate him one bit. So I think there's a problem there. Javier Manquillo is a fill-in man. He's a squad fill-in man who can do a job on the left or do the job on the right. But if you're going to have to go into a season and want to rely upon somebody like Javier Manquillo as your right back for the full season, you're going to get issues. And the same can be said of DeAndre Yedlin. Fantastic going forward, but so often gets caught out defensively. I think we've seen that with the goal the other day in the final friendly against Stoke. Simple ball in from the right. DeAndre Yedlin has no clue where Sam Clucas is at the back post and just standing looking at him 5 yards away. That's DeAndre Yedlin all over. I quite like him, and he was better in a disciplined Rafa Benitez side, but only just. He's not up to scratch, and I think talk of a new contract would be papering over the cracks. I think I think you could only keep one of them in your squad. It was either Manquillo or it was Yedlin for me. And I think they probably picked right. I think Manquillo's got less mistakes in him, whereas Yedlin's a bit flashier in a forward sense, but makes a lot of mistakes. So I think they've got big problems at right back. I'll switch across the left before we talk about the centre. The left, obviously, we're talking about Jamal Lewis. He's a player that we fully expect at this point to be a Newcastle United player. They've managed to win that race because they've paid the cash up front. Paying the cash up front for a team who's just been relegated is a fantastic bargaining tool. And they're also finding that with Bournemouth as well. If you pay the cash up front, it allows teams to reinvest in their own team, as well as pocket a little bit to sort of ease the financial woes that a drop to the Championship can bring. He's an athletic player who likes to get forward. Probably again best suited to a back five, the three, so he can bomb on down that left hand side. But I'm quite excited by this signing. He's a very good player. He's internationally capped with Northern Ireland, and I think that's exactly what Newcastle United need. A young, he fits the model, is what I would say. So we've seen a lot of breaking of the mould this summer with the type of players, the age, the contract, etc. that Newcastle United are paying out. But he really fits into the Mike Ashley mould that he's a player who they're going to pay, say, 13 million for, who could quite easily, if he continues to progress, be worth double that in a season's time and then potentially more beyond that. And he's only 22, so he really does fit that mould. In backup there, you've got Paul Dummett. Paul Dummett's going to have to be the left back. I don't believe he is a left back. He was an excellent left back under Rafa Benitez because he was one of the intelligent ones in the squad. And by intelligent, I mean football intelligence, somebody who listens, somebody who takes it all in and improves as a player. I think he was one of the real success stories of that Rafa Benitez 3 years, that Paul Dummett went from being a bit of a bit part left back who wasn't quite good enough and then wasn't quite good enough to play as one of your centre halves to being somebody who's quite a constant regular in that side and a valuable part of it as well. So I think Paul Dummett can do that filling role on the left. He's not going to give you the forward expansive stuff, but he'll definitely not let you down defensively. He'll also cover at centre half, which Newcastle United, although being well stocked, for me, do also have some issues. I think Jamal Lascelles is your first pick in any team because he's your skipper. Federico Fernandez is, for me, the best all-round defender Newcastle United have in their squad. Closely followed for me by Kieran Clark. I think Kieran Clark, again, especially in a back four, is one of those two quite easily, because he can play a bit. He can move. He's not worried about being pulled out wide because he's not slow. He's not quick either, but he's quite an intelligent defender. He can win it. He's physical. Federico Fernandez is exactly the same on the other side. Does all of those things. Ticks every single box. Scores goals as well. Both of them do. Both of them are a menace in the opposition box because they hassle Harry and they know how to defend against those type of players. So they know exactly what they wouldn't want to be defending against. So they attack the areas that defenders hate, defend them. From corners and set pieces. So those three centre halves for me are the three you kind of sort of build it around, with Dummett being a bit of a fill-in man. Then after that is the two controversial ones. I've had a bit of to and fro with some people on Twitter about Florian Lejeune. I think Florian Lejeune, when Rafa Benitez signed him, he really signed him and earmarked him as being a fantastic Premier League defender in that position. It took him a little bit of time. He was a slow burner because he hasn't got the pace. He hasn't got the pace of other players, and I think he struggles to get up to speed with the Premier League sort of dynamism and pace that there is in the forward lines. But when he is up to speed, he's like a Rolls Royce defender at times. He's fantastic on the ball. Injuries have killed him. I just don't believe he's the same player that he was when he signed, because he's had two major injuries. I think he was thrown in at the deep end a little bit last season when he was thrown in, but a player should be able to do that. A player should be able to come in and get up to speed quite quickly, and Lejeune proved, I think he did that the previous injury as well, proved he takes some time to really come back. And I wonder whether that's something that Newcastle United can rely upon. For me, he would be a player that I would probably quite happily let go. And I would say the same for Fabian Shaw. Again, a fantastic footballer, really fantastic footballer. But if you're going to play a four at the back, and let's be pragmatic here, you can't play Fabian Shaw. And I think we've seen that towards the end of last season, that he was moved into midfield because he's a little bit more suited in that system. I like them both. This isn't a criticism of Lejeune or a criticism of Shaw. Both fantastically cheap Rafa Benitez signings. Used his contacts brilliantly to bring these players in. Probably a combined fee of around £10 million for those two defenders. Newcastle United, even though they haven't probably seen the best of Lejeune at times, have probably more than had their money's worth out of those two players, given the price of players in the market at the moment. But I just don't feel like they fit into this team and this system. And I think that's why Steve Bruce has pursued some kind of backup just to fill that quota at centre half, because we've seen Isaac Hayden have to fill in there when a few players had a knock. So I think he's looking for Rob Holden, and I expect that will be a deal that, if it hasn't already, would progress very very quickly, and it'll be one that goes through before the end of the window, and possibly even before we'll play the game on Saturday. Another player who is a decent footballer. He's a decent centre half. Hasn't played a lot of games. Had injuries, but I think Bruce probably fancies taking a risk on his own man rather than having to sort of nurture a Lejeune back to fitness, or even Shaw, who's had a big injury with his shoulder being popped out at the end of last season. I think the discipline of Fabian Shaw was an issue for Benitez, and I think the discipline for Shaw is a big issue for Bruce as well, particularly in a four.
Okay, good stuff. Midfield, obviously we had our top goal scorer playing in midfield last season, John Joe Shelby. But there's a lot of competition in there, especially with the acquisition of Hendricks. Talk us through the midfield roles. Obviously, that's where the goal line supply is going to come from next season.
So I suppose what we're thinking Bruce will play, it's really difficult because we've had a media blackout. And we haven't even been able to see the team in action really at all this summer, apart from a couple of brief highlights packages. But what I would say, it looks as though he's probably going to want to play that too, like he did last season. And I've got to say that it wouldn't necessarily be my choice, but I think John Joe Shelvey will almost certainly be one of those two. He was the top scorer, as he said, last season in the Premier League. And on his day, he's got the ability to run a Premier League game. The problem is, and this is why he frustrates so much, particularly Newcastle United fans, is that we know that he's got that ability and we just don't see it. And that's an issue because when he's at his best, he's fantastic, absolutely fantastic, and spray balls all over the park. Is really slow at times in his movements around the park, but can, as he proved last season, can get on the end of things and break into the box and be an extra man getting in there. I suspect next season that'll be less of a role for his. He'll probably be sitting deeper, and it'll probably almost certainly be with Jeff Hendrick, I would think. I think Steve Bruce has probably got eyes on playing Hendrick a little bit deeper. If not, you're probably going to say it's Isaac Hayden again. I'm a big Isaac Hayden fan, but I think there's a lot made of Isaac Hayden's performances, and he's okay. He's an okay Premier League midfielder. I've seen a lot of people when the last England squad was announced, people saying, well, how can't Isaac Hayden get in if such and such or such and such gets in? Come on. I think you're looking through black and white spectacles there, because that's not... Isaac Hayden doesn't fit in an England squad. I'm not saying he's not a decent player. He is, but he's our level. He's not an England international. I don't think he's ever really proved that at Newcastle United. And it's the same for John Joe Shelvey as well. John Joe Shelvey's never ever looked like an England international, despite people putting calls out there for him. If he was of England international level standard, he would have spent more time at Liverpool and got more game time. And Swansea wouldn't have been so happy to give him away to Newcastle in that January window before we got relegated. There's obvious issues there, but those two, frustratingly, we've been looking to replace that central midfield duo since the year we got promoted. That was the central midfield we got promoted with, and barring the adaptation of Diarmi to a deeper role for that season and a half. Newcastle have really lacked in that area. Hopefully Hendrick can bring a little bit more in that department. Hendrick's got he's got an ability to sort of get into areas. He can be a real number 8 in that role, gets up and down, can go both ways. He's not a tackler, but he's a hustle Harry type of man. But he's got a little bit of quality as well, and I expect that, I think in his first team, if all fit, Bruce would probably like to see Shelvey and Hendrick probably be that midfield. But then beyond that, you've got other options. Matty Longstaff is the one for me that this season I'd really like to see break into that side, because as I've mentioned, there are limitations with Shelvey, there are limitations with Hayden. I would hope that Matty Longstaff could really take advantage in that department and establish himself as much more of a regular towards the end of this season. He needs to get fit, he needs to stay fit. It's a problem his brother's had. Hopefully he doesn't fall in that category as well. But Sean Longstaff can play in there. I genuinely don't believe that's his best position. I think he has to be played a little bit further forward. And when we get onto the attacking positions, that's probably where I'll slot him in.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it's a fascinating battle in that midfield position, and it'd be interesting to see, who Steve Bruce eventually starts when we come to the game against West Ham. The forward line is always going to be interesting. Obviously, as I mentioned at the start of the programme, we've pre-recorded this, and at the time of recording, Callum Wilson is on his way to Newcastle to talk terms and to hopefully take part in a successful medical. That's the striker that we've all been crying out for. Obviously, much needed with Dwight Gale being injured and Joe Linton not being in any kind of form. So, Andy Carroll, of course, having an injury list, being on the injury list more times than he is available. So, yeah, I mean, it's much needed. Give us your assessment of Newcastle United's players that they could select to try and score the goals to keep us up.
So I'll start probably in the centre, actually, the attacking midfield position. So I think it's a straight shootout in that position. Hendrick can play there, could also be him, but I think it's probably more a shootout between Miguel Almiron, who got 7 or 8 goals last season from that position, or Sean Longstaff. If Sean Longstaff's fit and firing, I think he gives a different dynamic in that area of the field, and he's probably somebody that I think Bruce will look to look to select. He can score goals with both feet. He can arrive late in the box. He can score from distance. And I just think you'll be able to mould back into a midfield when you're under pressure. I really like him in that position, and that's just a personal choice. It's no slight on Almiron, because again, I've said on here numerous times in the past, I think Almiron's a fantastic footballer. He lacks a little bit of quality in the final third, despite chipping in with goals and assists last season. And that's something that you could maybe improve on a touch. But I think it's probably a straight shoot out there. And again, like I say, Hendrick could easily fill in that role if you're trying to play a little bit more of a defensive side. Out on the right, Ryan Fraser will be a Newcastle United player. I've been on top of this story all summer. It's taken its time, as Jeff Hendrick did, but it's as good as there. When we speak on Sunday afternoon, until he signs for Aston Villa on Monday morning. No, he's as good as a Newcastle United player. That's all pretty much there and sorted. And I think he's a fantastic addition. We're only talking probably 12 to 18 months ago. Newcastle United would have, like, even then, under Benitez, would have snapped your hand off to take Fraser and Wilson. Really would, because they're a fantastic pairing with Josh King. Players that Rafa Benitez and the scouting team really, really went in for during their time here. And those reports have stayed true. And they're eventually probably going to get both. I'm certain they're going to get both. Josh King, I think, has got eyes on it. Seen that Manchester United move fall in January, I think he's got moves on a European. We've got European ambitions, so that's probably one that's going to fall by the wayside. Not that it's been really on the agenda this summer. So yeah, Ryan Fraser on the right hand side. Obviously, doubts about Matt Ritchie. Will Matt Ritchie stay? Will he not? That's not part of the deal, but it would be absolutely no shock to me if we did get towards the end of the summer or the summer window. It's not going to be the summer by the time the summer window ends, but when it does, I wouldn't be surprised if Matt Ritchie maybe went out on loan, possibly to Bournemouth, if a financial package can't be put together that satisfies the player and satisfies Newcastle United. And I suspect there's probably some talks with regards to Ritchie's future gone on as part of this Callum Wilson deal, and promises made. Because there's only certain reasons why you would reject a higher bid from another club and not ask the other club to come in with something higher. But the player's obviously had his say, and I think they've let him go to the place that he wants to go to. He doesn't want to go to Aston Villa. He wants to come to Newcastle United, which is something that's really, really positive. How many times have we talked about a player doing something like that with Newcastle United in recent years, turning down another top flight rival? Yes, Aston Villa just avoided relegation, but they're spending big. They're going to have a go this summer. And why wouldn't he want to sign there? He's from the Midlands. Now he wants to come to Newcastle United. And I suspect, even though he's a number 13, I've heard little rumours he might be the number 9. And I think he probably quite fancies that. Be interested to see what number he is given. But I've heard little rumours that Joe Linton might have that pressure taken off his shoulders this summer. Obviously, we'll only have to wait and see, because we'll find that out at the weekend when the numbers are on people's backs, because Joe Linton's certain to be there and Callum Wilson is almost certain to be there too. Also on the right hand, we've got anybody else for the right hand side? I think that's we're done. Left hand side, Ansett Maximin is your pick straight away. He's a game changer. He's the one that can give you something different. And we've seen the qualities that he can bring to the side. Beyond that, Joe Linton's probably somebody that will have to drop in there from time to time, because he's been proven he's not really a centre forward for Newcastle United. And then up top, we've talked in depth about Wilson. I'm a massive fan. I said that as far back as when we started this show, Steve, when we talked about centre forwards, he was the one that I really fancied Newcastle United to go out and get. I always kind of feared that he would be outside of their price bracket. It appears they've been able to sort of hold their metal and get him for a sum that doesn't look ridiculous. Doesn't fit the Mike Ashley mould at all. No way, shape. We've never paid this kind of figure. And I know it's all relative. Newcastle United haven't paid 20 million for many players under Mike Ashley. Only one, in fact, because Miguel Almiron, despite being 21 million, was not a 21 million pound signing. He cost around 15, 16 million. And the rest was add-ons, but it was painted as a 21 million pound signing because they really wanted to be seen to be breaking the record. Yeah. It wasn't. It was nowhere near. So Newcastle don't do this. They don't go out and spend that kind of money. If they do, you would expect it would be a Joe Linton, somebody who was a 22, 23. Almiron was mid-20s when they signed him for that fee. Alan St-Maximin, in and around that Almiron fee, was the same sort of age. Callum Wilson's 29 next year, 29 this season. That's not the type of player that Newcastle need to go out and sign. But there's nothing wrong with that either. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But Mike Ashley's never, ever said yes to this kind of thing, which is totally bizarre. There could be other reasons. There could be everyone's speculating as to why that could be the case. But whatever it is, we've now got a centre forward who I believe is an England centre forward. He's scored and had caps recently. And when have Newcastle United gone out and done that? Signed somebody who's in and around the fringes of an England squad and really got everybody excited. They've really bought from the domestic market as well, which is a real shock this summer. Newcastle United are known for going out and finding little sort of bargain buys from the continent and picking up value elsewhere, because there is value. There's more value than what you normally get here, but they've really taken advantage this summer with Fraser, who was courted at one point, courted by probably 70-80% of the Premier League would have taken him quite happily. Some of those top six sides, I know Tottenham and Arsenal were two names mentioned to the player by his agent earlier this year. Never materialised, of course, but Newcastle United thought of good interest. Crystal Palace are a decent club now, decent manager. He's not going back to come to Newcastle. Part of it could be the finance, but I don't buy this. I don't buy this moving closer to family thing with Fraser. By the way, I'm not buying into that. No, it's probably quick. I lived in Dundee for 5 years. It'll be quicker to fly from where he was in Bournemouth up to Aberdeen than what it would be to drive from Newcastle all the way up there, or even fly. I mean, it's going to be easier to get flights from down there all the way up to Aberdeen than what it would be for Newcastle. So, yeah, I don't quite buy into that idea. I know it paints a picture for people out there, but I genuinely don't think it's that. But I think these players, and I'm not Steve Bruce's biggest fan, neither are you, Stephen, but we've talked about his style, and I think his style is, I think players quite like him. He's not always going to get the best team out there, but he is like a player's manager. And he'll not always get the best out of them tactically or really bring the best out of them as footballers long to medium term. But I think he's quite a nice manager to play for. I think the players quite like being in around his team. Again, whether they're fully tested in a footballing sense is another thing altogether. But I think in terms of morale, I think they really do. The players buy into Bruce, and he's quite an affable character. He's somebody that if you do have those face-to-face talks, which the Fraser deal was mentioned about, it would be no shock to see Steve Bruce win the day with certain players over other clubs, because he's got that character. He's a likeable guy. And people, like I say, if you speak to any players that have played under him, they do like playing for him. There's obviously not Ross McCormack. He wasn't particularly happy playing with him, but there's a few others out there. But mostly, in the main, he's quite a popular manager. Can't remember where I was now. Centre forward position, Andy Carroll. Right, we're getting Andy Carroll. I suspect Andy Carroll will probably be Newcastle centre forward when we start against West Ham next week. And I'm saying this for the simple reason that he's played most of the pre-season. So I would suspect he'll be the one that gets selected. We'll probably get an hour out of him. Fingers crossed he's fit, of course, because that's the problem with Andy Carroll. But I suspect he'll be the man who leads the line. I don't think it's a bad choice, really. It's against his old club. You really want to make a point down there. All eyes will be on him in that game in a lot of senses. And there's a lot of turmoil at West Ham, so I could see him causing some havoc in that game for an hour. And then fingers crossed we'll have somebody like a Callum Wilson to come on and really make a difference. A lot depends on fitness. I'll be honest with you, I'm not clued up on how much football Callum Wilson's played this summer. Be interested to see. But if he can come in and hit the ground running, then he's got to start if they're paying £20 million for him. But I've just got a feeling that Andy Carroll might get a nod from the off down there in London. And after that, there's nothing options. You'd be surprised if I think Dwight Gale's fighting to be named in the 25-man squad. But if he's realistically going to be out for 3 months, I think it's going to be a big if on that sense, because he might not be back till December. And December, November, December. Do you name him in the squad when he can maybe only play 7 games, 6 games, or do you name somebody else? It's one of those. And I think they're having issues getting rid of players like Yoshinori Muto. I didn't mention Christine Atsu on that left-hand side. That they're the type of players who they are looking for an exit door. Not the players themselves. Newcastle United desperately want them to go, but they've been trying to trying to palm Atsu off in some ways to for a little while now behind the scenes, and there doesn't seem to be a stack of takers. I know Celtic are somebody that have really taken a good look at him. And Celtic are hoping that this Ryan Fraser deal almost triggers Newcastle United to allow Christian Atsu to go north of the border. Fingers crossed it does. I think he'd have a big impact up there. He's a decent footballer, a decent professional. He's not been a bad player for Newcastle, but really he's another player that we're looking at saying, can we improve on him? And very much so. You would want to. And Yoshinori Muto, I genuinely think at points that there is a player in there, whether he's a player in England and whether it's a player in this system. I just don't think managers trust him. Benitez brought him in, didn't trust him enough to play him. I suspect he's probably a better player playing off a front man rather than the front man, simply because of his size and stature. I think he was brought in some ways to rival Jose Perez when he was signed, to play in that role just off, buzzing around, busy, not a goal scorer, so you don't want to play him as a centre forward, but he just hasn't really, it just hasn't been a signing that's gelled at all. And I don't think anybody would be disappointed to see the back of him. And I think he's one that probably towards the end of the window, Newcastle really pushing to get out. The problem with him is he's on massive wages. Still got years left on his contract. He's going to have to be a giveaway to somebody, and that's a really difficult deal to do. A loan back to Germany could be back on the table. There's clubs in Italy, I think, have been interested. In Spain have inquired, but it's a difficult one. Newcastle have got a few of those in their squad. That's without even getting into the likes of Henri Saivet, who's played every game in pre-season. Incredible. A lad who is not going to be a part of the Newcastle United squad has been playing games this pre-season. Incredible. But that's Newcastle United. We're always doing things like this. It's nothing new. What's the point? Why? Obviously, Bruce is trying to be kind to him and give him 20 minutes here and there to get the lad's spirits up, but Luke's been picking a wage up here for doing nothing. He's on a massive wage, and it was another total error of judgment from the people at the top of the football club, whereby they sign a player because they think they'll get other players, etc. And a little bit of a favour signing. It doesn't work. You put somebody on big wages and they're not good enough, you're not going to be able to get rid of them. We've seen that with Dwight Gale. They probably would have got rid of him if he wasn't on such high wages. Yoshinori Muto, Ashraf Lazar. Ashraf Lazar was a Benitez mistake, and he admits that himself. He was painted a picture from his contacts in Italy that he was going to be something that he wasn't, and he really wasn't. He was in there with a Jesus Gamez situation where he got two fullbacks in. Everyone thought, right, well, they're going to do something. One from Serie A, one from La Liga. Both absolutely horrific. Rolando Aarons is another player that's probably going to have to find a way out of the football club. And then we mentioned it on the last show, Steve, that there's so many players in this squad who've got 1 year left on their deals. Dwight Gale, Isaac Hayden, Fabian Shaw, DeAndre Yedlin. The list's almost endless. Kieran Clark, Federico Fernandez, Carl Darlow, and to a lesser extent, of course. But there's lots of players in this squad who've got no idea what they know their short-term future, but beyond that, they don't. That could go one of two ways. If you've got players who are content here and really want to stay, that could bring the best out of them. They'll want to prove that they need to be at this football club. I suspect a lot of players on that list aren't in that category, though. So I think that's quite a dangerous position to put yourselves in.
How much of a concern is the pre-season form to you? I mean, Newcastle's pre-season is the same as everyone else's. It's a lot shorter. The caliber of opposition we've talked about on the show hasn't been great because of COVID and not being able to travel great distances. So had to rely on substandard opposition. It has to be said, but that substandard opposition has turned us over. 5-1 defeat at Middlesbrough. A rearranged game, a return fixture wasn't forthcoming. We didn't find out why from the club. Neil Warnock was the man who said it was because of the injuries that were had, but if that's to be believed. And then we played Stoke, managed, of course, by former Newcastle forward Michael O'Neill, and we lost a narrow game 1-0. Obviously, we had the issues of discipline as well with Jamal Lascelles getting sent off against Middlesbrough. It's never great when you have that kind of pre-season. So is that something to be concerned about, or is it simply just a case of blowing the cobwebs off with pre-season?
No, I think it is a concern. You've got to think Newcastle United are going up against Premier League opposition. as of Saturday, and they've really struggled against lower championship opposition this summer. It has to be a big concern. Yes, these are training games, but it's also a little bit of momentum, a bit of confidence. If we're not confident, the players will probably feel a little bit of that as well. I think the game on Saturday was less of a litmus test in a sense because it was so depleted, the squad, and I suspect, although some of those knocks may see the players miss the first game, there'll be others who would be protected a little bit and will be fine for that game. Obviously, then there's the likes of Jamal Lascelles who definitely come back in. But it'll be a new look Newcastle United side on Saturday compared to the one we've seen the Saturday just gone, and it really needs to be because they were very poor by all accounts on Saturday and even poorer in the week against Middlesbrough. That's the litmus test. Is the Middlesbrough game is the big concern, not just because of the scoreline, but because they effectively put a pretty good side out there. In that first half, it was probably a 70 to 80% side of what you would have expected at that point to start the season. Probably give or take a Jacob Murphy and a couple of others take out the side. That is the team you would expect to start at West Ham, minus any signings, of course. And I think that's a huge concern for Steve Bruce. It has to be. And I think there's a little bit of the need for action has come in this week for the transfers. They've almost realised the gravity of the situation, which is something that this hierarchy at Newcastle have never really seemed to have done to this point. But they did this time realise that something needs to change, and luckily they pulled their finger out and produced some. I think a lot of Newcastle fans are quite positive now, and I think it has lifted a little bit of gloom despite that defeat again at the weekend. If they can get these deals, we're probably speaking ahead, and they've probably done these deals. But if they can get the left back, the centre forward, and the right winger in, I think Newcastle United could probably say, even if they called it a day there, would say they've probably had a decent summer. It's no more than decent. They're the type of players Newcastle United should be signing. But they don't, which is why it feels like a big celebration, because these are the type of players Newcastle United don't sign. They never go out and sign proven Premier League quality. And I would argue the 2 free transfers, despite a lot of criticism, I think in our bracket, I think Newcastle United have probably signed the best 2 free transfers that were available in the Premier League.
I'd agree. Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's been so far. All of these players have come in, over this next few days before this show goes live, then it will have been a really good window so far. And of course, that will also be judged on who actually leaves. If we lose Alan St. Maximin before the end of October, then of course, that it does move the goalpost slightly. But as far as kicking the season off with these players in the bag, and people who've established themselves in the Premier League, as you say, homegrown players, it seems though that there's been a narrative changed, and that's what's causing probably the most discussion on social media over the last few days. Is some people feel this is completely unlike Ashley. Is Ashley being given the go ahead by potential new owners to spend money, and are they investing money into the club because they know there's going to be an announcement soon? Has been one of the one of the suggestions. Other people simply suggesting that this is Mike Ashley looking at things and thinking, well, I cannot afford for this team to be relegated, because if the worst scenario happens and the takeover doesn't go through, then this team has to remain in the Premier League at all costs, because if I do want to sell it, then it's going to sell for peanuts in the Championship, and I'm going to lose a lot of money.
Yeah, I think it's probably more of that. Like I say, I think there's actually been a bit of a realisation. And let's not forget, we had a previous manager in Rafa Benitez who really jarred with Mike Ashley as a character. The two did not particularly, they didn't dislike each other, but they had totally different ethos, totally different ideas and directions that they wanted the football club to go in. And that really didn't mix well. In Steve Bruce, you've got a manager who was effectively selected by, whatever is to be believed, did Steve Bruce put himself forward? Did he not? We don't really know the true story. But it was Mike Ashley's appointment. Mike Ashley met him. Mike Ashley was happy for him to take the job. And I think Mike Ashley's a little bit more invested in Steve Bruce emotionally than what he was in Rafa Benitez. So I think he's more likely to push the boat a little for Steve Bruce. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that. Steve Bruce has obviously been applying the pressure behind the scenes, saying, "Come on, we need to sort this out. We need players." And to be honest, in fairness, he's produced the goods, and I do give a lot of credit to Steve Bruce for that. Not necessarily the people above, because it's gone past that for me with the people above. They've made so many bad decisions and mistakes that a little couple of decent summers isn't going to solve that. There's a lot more water being under the bridge than just a couple of £20 million signings. So yeah, I think Steve Bruce deserves a lot of credit for what they've done this summer.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree on that. I think there's certainly been a relationship built between them, and that's the reason that we've seen, this particular transfer window a bit more action and early on. And of course, Lee Johnny's been criticised by us on this show for being quite slow. Well, he's managed to do more than one deal, together, which is great. Ryan Fraser, Callum Wilson, Jamal Lewis, all of these signings, ongoing as we speak, but hopefully all done and dusted by the time this show goes out Tuesday night. Joe Linton, obviously we've talked a little bit about him. A lot of people chattering on Twitter about the number 9 shirt and saying that if Callum Wilson comes in, should he have the shirt taken off him? You've already suggested that might be a possibility. I think a lot of fans also feel though that shirt should be earned. But is your understanding that potentially Callum Wilson could take the number 9 and Joe Linton will happily give it up?
I do believe it is something that's come up in conversations as part of this deal. Whether it's something that actually comes into action is another thing altogether, and we'll find that out relatively quickly, because I imagine both will be involved on Saturday. So it'll be something that we'll know either way, probably on Friday, I think. We'll probably see some kind of a suggestion or announcement of squad numbers ahead of the season. But it's a difficult decision. It's a one that does it have to be earned? Does it not? Yeah, it probably should be. It probably should be. But it isn't always. It's often just given to the centre forward. And I think that's something that has to be weighed up, really. I would probably say stick with Joe Linton. Probably. I think we've got a visitor in the back here. This is all like BBC.
That's very good. Very good.
No, so I would probably give it to. I'd probably stick with Joe Linton in some sense. Depends. Does the player want it? Like, you've got to ask that as well. Does the player feel like there's extra pressure being a number 9 at Newcastle United? Maybe he does. I wouldn't give it to Andy Carroll, as some people have seemed to suggest. He's not going to play enough to be wearing the number 9. I'd like to see Callum Wilson get it. I think it's a real selling point of being a centre forward at Newcastle United. He's a player who scores double figures in the Premier League quite regularly. So I think I want to see him turn around Newcastle and say, I want that shirt. I think that's a positive thing. That's a sign of intent that he's come here to score goals, and I'm really excited by him. Even if he doesn't do that, if he takes the 13, I think that's what he wears for Bournemouth, number 13. From memory, I don't think anybody's got the 13 shirt in Newcastle. So that probably could be an easy fit if they didn't want to, if the manager didn't want to upset things with Joe Linton in a sense. But yeah, I would say it's a tough one. I want to see Wilson come in and say, yes, I want that number 9 shirt, because it's outside of being a top 6 footballer at the moment in the Premier League. There aren't many big selling points that football clubs have. But that number 9 shirt for a centre forward at Newcastle United is a real point of difference.
The fact that the club haven't really been speaking to the journalists has been a bit strange. The embargo, what's all that been about, Liam? Any ideas, or any suggestions as to why there's been a lack of communication?
I don't think it's been in some senses, I don't think it's been a coordinated thing. I know they did have some staffing issues for the Middlesbrough game. It was said to me, and then it was explained later on that Middlesbrough don't do communications during games. So that was an explanation for that kind of thing. I find the media blackout on Saturday inexplainable. There's no reason why in a 52,000 seater stadium you couldn't allow a few pressmen in, and then you couldn't do a Zoom call straight after with a manager. Because what we've had this summer is we're going into a season where, as pressmen who relay things to fans from these games, is we're going into a season whereby nobody knows what the system is. They don't know what he's trying to play, what he's trying to do. You certainly sometimes see players will come back, say Jacob Murphy, for example, who's been away, he'll come back and look really full of it, and then you'll see somebody else with their head down, and you can almost assess the type of players who are going into the season with a point to prove and who isn't. We haven't got any of that kind of insight this summer. And I also think the lack of Steve Bruce press conferences. He only did one, that was prior the first game. I think that was against Crewe. That was the only one he did, Zoom call. And that hasn't allowed anybody to hold the manager and the football club to account. And to me, that's the primary job of a newspaper man, is to hold the manager to account on behalf of the fans. And there hasn't been any kind of chance to do that. And I think that's, to me, I hope the football clubs aren't using this COVID-19 crisis to reset the balance and limit the amount of press you can get in, limit the amount of questions that can be asked of managers, because it's the lifeblood of it. Fans rely on it. We need the silly answers, the positive answers, all the things that you hear, you might laugh about with your mates or at work or whatever. Anything the manager says are actually, they come out of questions that we ask. We ask these questions to get these answers, whether it be on injuries, whether it be on transfers, whatever. And there hasn't been any of that on the record. And that, to me, is a issue if it continues to be so.
It's it's just strange. I mean, the club doesn't communicate a great deal anyway. But thanks for clearing that up. Let's look ahead to the weekend's game, West Ham away. West Ham not without their own problems, Liam. Newcastle, normally a club in turmoil going into a new season, but that's not the case really with Newcastle. But West Ham have got serious problems, haven't they?
Look, I think there's a certain amount of clubs in the Premier League who've got a real weak underbelly, and I would class West Ham as one of them. They're always a club that are on the verge of crisis. Many people would class Newcastle United in that as well, and I'm not afraid to say that. It is, and it can be. But West Ham, I think, are about to implode. It certainly feels like. I wondered whether they'd do that last season. They always just had enough to stay out of the relegation battle. I think this season's going to be a real struggle for them. The one thing that we've seen come out recently, which the club cannot be happy with, is the criticism that's come from within the dressing room. Noble, Wilshere and others commenting on social media posts with regards to the sale of a player recently. That's quite incredible. And the accusations of go, I think it was Wilshere had said something like, go somewhere you'll be valued. I think that is an absolutely horrendous statement from one of your own footballers towards your own football club. It shouldn't be done, but I think that shows the mood that is in and around that football club at the moment. And I'm never convinced by David Moyes. I just don't think David Moyes is a manager that really inspires. I think they've spent a lot of money on a lot of players, but they still lack in a lot of areas, West Ham. And I think after the summer that we've had, which has been up and down and up again, I think West Ham's a perfect game for us. Going down there, we always do well against them home and away. You always fancy we to beat West Ham, and it wouldn't shock me, to be honest, with a couple of new additions, with the wind going the right way, if they get Wilson, if they get Fraser, if they get Holden, if they get a couple of others potentially as well, because I know they're looking into other deals. They might even sign it. This won't be this week, but by the end of the window, they might even sign another centre forward. It's something they are looking into, and it's something that they need. I've said it on here before, they do need that. But I think with a couple of smart additions, with the names that we've previously mentioned, bring Hendrick back into the team and others, I think Newcastle have got a really good chance this weekend.
Sign Josh King and then bring Eddie Howe in if Steve Bruce gets sacked.
Eddie Howe, the little stories I've heard about him.
I've seen him. I did one thing I noticed on your Twitter, mate. I've given it a retweet myself. Was Rafa Benitez, and he never changes, does he? He's never far from Newcastle fans' thoughts, I don't think. But a nice little video there from across in China where he was even coaching the table tennis.
I've no idea. You might know. I've no idea if Rafa's even any good. He loves his basketball, but is he any good at table tennis? And he's in the air of the boy, and you can see him giving all the directions out.
He's brilliant. Well worth a watch. Get on to Liam's Twitter to see that. Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot now. Give us your prediction for Newcastle's lineup against West Ham. How do you think Steve Bruce will set up formation, and can you name a team? And give us your prediction for the game as well.
Yeah, well, I suspect he'd probably go with Darlow. Darlow, Lascelles and Fernandez as your centre-halves. Manquillo would probably be a right-back with the new boy Lewis as your left-back. Midfield, I think he will go with Hendrick and Shelvey. I think Almiron will play further forward in that system. And I think you'll get probably, depending on the fitness of Richie, I think Richie could play, and obviously whether he leaves or not would be one, because they are going to be short. You can't put a Ryan Fraser straight into the mix. He's going to be nowhere near fit enough. And then, as I've said, a lot depends on the fitness. I've got a suspicion Carroll might start, St. Maximin plays on the left. But I think if Wilson comes in and looks good in training, I don't think any manager would hold back their new £20 million centre forward. So maybe I've gone full circle in the case of this hour. I've gone around from picking Andy Carroll to, go on, just throw him in, throw the new striker in. So yeah, I think that's where we'll go for. And as for the game itself, I fancy Newcastle. And that might sound really weird to everyone out there, but I do. West Ham's one of those games. Tottenham are normally the other games that I remember when I was a season ticket holder, I always earmarked as, they're good. We can get amongst them, we can get at them. And I always think that with West Ham still. Tottenham have gone up a level, and we seem to struggle against them at times, especially at home. But West Ham are still on that. We'll beat them. They can beat us, but we'll normally beat them when we score a couple of goals. We've had a rubbish pre-season. We've had so much turmoil emotionally, but I fancy we'd go them. Maybe we'll beat them 2-1.
Okay, great stuff, Liam, as always. And apologies we're not live, as I said, folks. Sometimes work does get in the way, and that's certainly the case this week. We'll be back live again with Liam next week. Liam, just give a quick plug to your other stuff just before we finish.
Yeah, well, you might sort of see out there, journalism costs cash. If you like what I do on here, if you like what I do on Twitter and my stories in the Shields Gazette, you can subscribe. It costs £1 a month for the first 2 months. If you subscribe through the links that are on all of my stories that you'll see online, you get fantastic coverage in Newcastle, not only from myself, Miles Starforth, Ross Gregory, people like Phil Smith, Rich Mania, who do Sun and others. There's all sorts of coverage you get on the Shields Gazette and other sports and all the news, particularly if you're from that area. So yeah, get on, subscribe. We also do our own podcast as well, which Steve's been a guest on before. It's called Mouth of the Time Pod. We normally record that on a Wednesday. So yeah, if you've got any issues that you want tackled this week, send your messages in to me on Twitter, and I'll do my best to answer them.
And as we speak, I'm always checking Twitter when we're on air, and Mike Ashley's actually trending for something positive. Wonders will never cease. Wonders will never cease. Well, Liam, look forward to catching up with you next week and looking back on hopefully a successful opening game against West Ham. But until then, Liam, speak to you soon. Have a good week.
See you later, mate.